Aloha, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Triple F podcast, Faith and Family First. And I'm joined today by a special guest, Maile Domingo, and we are going to be talking about the Ohana and the culture here in Hawaii and how we can take this beautiful islands that we call home and incorporate it into what we do in everyday life when it comes to the identity of our children. So let's chat about that. Maile, welcome to the show today.
Aloha, Mai. Good to be with you, Eva. You're so magnificent. I feel so honored and privileged to spend a moment with you.
Nope, this time I'm honored because I know that through our conversation today, Maile, that we're going to bless a lot of people here in Hawaii. And, you know, you and I both, I know this, we love this place. You know, this is our home. Everything that we do, we live and breathe what we've learned here in the islands and the way that our culture just is so unique and special. And I know that our listeners are going to be very blessed by you sharing your mana'o with us today.
Thank you.
So let's start by this. So as I introduce you to our audience, they might be wondering, who is this Maile and what makes her tick? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am blessed. I am the youngest of 8 children, and my mom and dad are Raymond and Burley Ayu. My dad passed away. My mom is still living. She's like an 88-year-old feisty, empowered woman that has all my admiration. And it's really been a privilege to grow up in that community. And there is kind of a voice that they gave me, and I'm sure my siblings, to know who I am and to know the power and dignity of family. And it was on Kauai. We grew up kanikapila, talk story, pull weeds in the yard before you go swim, pick lychee from the tree and walk down to the beach. And yeah, my mom was a great cook because she actually learned from my grandma. And so, or my dad's mom, and I'm just very privileged to have grown up in that Ohana style, local style, work hard, but play hard.
So because most of our listeners and viewers come from a faith-based background, most are Christian, tell us a little bit about your faith and how your faith helps you get through your day-to-day experiences.
Well, it was very interesting because I actually was born and raised a Catholic. And I think I must have been like 25 years old before I knew there was other faiths in the world. That sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's true. That's how naive I was. But I think it was the majesty of how my parents loved anybody from any walk of life, from any faith life. And so even though I was Catholic, we were like the best of friends with the Buddhists and with the Baptists and with the Native Hawaiian church. And so I didn't know there was a difference. Like the titles on the doors of the churches, it didn't even register to me, because what my mom and dad taught me was that they're Ohana, they're family. We share a meal together. We talk story together. We let our kids play in the rivers and the waterfalls together. We barbecue at the beach together. And it didn't matter. All it mattered was that we were grateful and we were just appreciative of each other, appreciative of the food we shared together, appreciative of even the sorrows and tears that we cried on each other's shoulders. And that's what I was raised with. So as a Catholic, and I am a Hawaiian, I'm a Native Hawaiian, I didn't have that wrestle of how can you be one but not the other, or the other but not. No, in my upbringing, up to 3 generations, we had great practice of the Hawaiian culture and the Catholic culture, and they just married each other so beautifully. And so I credit that to my mom, my dad, my grandma and grandpa, because they were just able to put that together. And when I went through the most difficult times in my life, all I did was cling to my Lord, to my Creator. I just clung to him. And somehow I think of my grandbaby when she does like the koala on you, and she just is in delight because she's safe in your arms. She's being loved by your voice, and it's just a moment where intimacy grows. And I think that was another word that describes my faith. My mom and dad had an intimacy with their Creator that was so powerful and so respectful that they knew they couldn't do it all by themselves. And so somewhere along the way, I also practiced and discovered that skill, that as great as we can be on our own, we're only great because Keakua carries us through it all.
I love that you're sharing that. So, a lot of people over the course of doing this podcast, they've heard little, aspects of my life growing up. And my grandfather and grandmother were both born and raised on Maui, and their parents were the first generation that came from Portugal, and they were actually on Kauai. But what I love, my grandfather grew up in the days of the camps, right? And he always would tell stories, about, the Portuguese camp, you had the Filipino camp, you had the Japanese camp, you had the Hawaiian camp. Well, my grandfather was kalohe, like you can't imagine. Okay. So he was constantly getting into trouble. In fact, his generation was the generation where they had nicknames. So they didn't really go by their first name. They went by whatever their nickname was. And his nickname was Tramp. So everybody on Maui knew him as Manuel Tramp Andrade, but just Tramp. And so every summer I would go and spend time with my grandfather and grandmother. My parents would ship me and my brothers off to Maui to spend the summers with my grandparents. So it was awful. I mean, awful. It was wonderful experience of growing up. But kind of what you shared, it was interesting. So there was a day that my grandfather and I went to one of the grocery stores, and we walk in and there was an old Hawaiian man that was up at the cash register. And so we walked in, my grandfather looked up at him, and Maile, my grandfather started conversing with him in Hawaiian. And they had a conversation in Hawaiian. Now, mind you, I'm about 12 years old. I had no idea that my grandfather even knew Hawaiian. And so he had his conversation with him, introduced me, as his granddaughter. And then as we're leaving the store, I go, Grandpa, you speak Hawaiian? And he goes, no. And I sat there and I was laughing because I thought to myself, wait, didn't you just speak Hawaiian? But what it was, right, is that growing up in the community here in Hawaii, all the way back from our grandparents, exactly what you said is what he witnessed, was that you're all part of this culture. Of course, you have your own way of doing things, right? I mean, you're taught by your own ethnic background or whatever. But in those days, people came together as a community and developed this communication that we know today as pidgin, because they had to talk to each other, right? But it was more than just the language. There was a heart connection that just weaved itself through the community. And Maile, you are so beautiful in the way that you show this and you experience this. And that's kind of why I wanted you on the show today, because we hear it in Hollywood talks all the time about, well, Ohana means this, right? So when Lilo and Stitch came out, right? Ohana means family and no one is left behind, right? And all these great, wonderful things. But the Hawaiian culture and the way that we experience life here is unique and special. And it weaves itself so beautifully through what we believe as Christians. And I wanted to bring you on today to kind of address some of these things that we're hearing out there, because I do believe that our faith, when we marry it to our culture and we bring it into the community, we can change this place. And when I say change this place, I mean in the sense of bringing more of our Christian faith and ideals. So here's a question. So I'm sorry, I'm like, I throw this and then I'm like, and you're looking at me like, okay. So let's start with this. A lot of our listeners and viewers, if they grew up here, they're going to know this, but we have some viewers that are on the mainland and they're not going to know this. Let's talk a little bit about the faith of the Queen, right? The early days of the Christian religion here, because that really does play into what our motto is. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Wow, very interestingly enough. So in looking at some archaeological data that's recorded, Hawaii had its own faith. And some people attribute it to them recognizing a one and a true God. That was up until about the year 1200, when the Tahitian travelers came and they brought their religion. And one of the things that is accredited to their visit is a complete change in religion. And they begin to worship the Polynesian gods. Many gods were recognized, and that became the law of the land. And it was accompanied by the kapu system. And a lot of people might only think that kapu means stay out. But actually the kapu system was accompanied by a system of really barbaric behaviors. And that lived in Hawaii all the way up until Christianity was introduced in the 1800s. And at the time, King Kamehameha I was living. And when he passed away, there had already been an introduction of Christianity through, I know that timeline doesn't match up, but that's because we're talking about the establishment of Christianity in the 1800s. But with the other visitors and sailors that came from Spain and from Europe, there was an introduction of the one true God to the leaders of Hawaii. And it was an introduction to an entirely different thought, that because through the kapu system, the gods were punishing, they were devastating, and they delivered a blow of death to anyone who didn't obey, didn't follow, and didn't acknowledge. And my personal perspective is that the leadership, the chiefs and the battle warriors used the fear that can be instilled in gods that will punish to empower them as human beings over the land. And so I believe they used that to their advantage, and I don't believe that that was the truth. And our queen, the wife of Kamehameha I, Queen Ka'ahumanu, when she was introduced to the idea of the one true God who loved, who was merciful, and who was a giver of all things, she knew in her heart that he must be real. And here's an interesting thing, because some things are recorded. And I don't remember if she wrote it or someone recorded her thoughts. But she said that I knew when they introduced the one true God that he was real. And the reason is because when I talked to all of my gods, they never answered me. But when whoever this God was, I spoke to him, he answered me in the depths of my heart. And I remember when I read that, I was like, whoa, that's powerful. But because she had faith in the response of the God within her being, she had confidence that she could abolish the kapu system. And many people know those stories. And she did, and she marched forward. But what is even further evidence is Kamehameha I, as well as Heva, his warrior leader. It is written in some of their writings that they too knew that those gods, the polytheistic gods, were false or didn't exist, but they used the system, the kapu system, and the fear that had been supplanted for 400 or 500 years to control people and to benefit. And they knew it. And so to see that those things have been written and to ponder on those things. I think that our queen, Ka'ahumanu, and those that followed with her must have had incredible courage. The kind of courage that doesn't come from our humanity, but the kind of courage that comes from the conversation that's within.
You know, it has to be that way, Maile, because when we look at, and we're not gonna take a position on what happened on the overthrow, because we know that we'd have to do a whole different show on that. We'd probably get a lot of hate mail, because there's, as you know, there are strong feelings about that. I will say, though, that when she was imprisoned, her faith, in spite of the fact that she was imprisoned, and I believe wrongly imprisoned, she, rather than attacking her enemies, she did what Jesus did, and she prayed for them, and she wrote some of the most beautiful music from her prison cell. Now, I know some people that don't know might be imagining that she's in a prison cell, but she was imprisoned in her own home. And isn't it interesting that if you look at this prophetically, doesn't that feel like what Christians feel like today, that they're imprisoned in their own home, in their faith, that what you believe you can do in the privacy of your own home, but if you take it out into the community, you can be punished for that, right? You can be silenced because of what you believe. And I believe that if the Queen were alive today, she would be telling us to pray for our enemies, to take the gifting that the Lord has put in each of us, our unique giftedness. We're created, right? We're carved on the palm of his hand. We're individually created, individually unique. To take that and to bring it into the community, because it's that, just like what the Queen did, is what brings change, because her faith did not waver in spite of her circumstances.
Indeed. And just to bring clarity that we're talking about a different queen that actually lived 7 generations after the queen that I was talking about. Now we're referring to
yes. Thank you, Maile.
Queen Liliuokalani, who lived and was subject to the overthrow at that time in the latter 1800s. And so, yes, she, along with that whole line of ali'i, kings and queens that came after Queen Ka'ahumanu, they embraced the one true God. They embraced Christianity. And through their struggles and trials, they acknowledged his power, his presence, his healing, and his solutions. I mean, can you imagine? Here you are the Queen of Hawaii. You've established a Hawaiian constitution through your brothers 2 generations prior. And you're trying to hold together something of Hawaii that you love, primarily her people. But what she knew was that the people of the overthrow had equipment and tools that could literally wipe out the Hawaiian race. And so I believe that she went deep within. She went to listen to the wisdom that we all have. If we just hamo, if we just quiet a little bit, just listen. And I believe that from the whisperings of her soul and her own conversation with God, that she did choose to not enter into battle. And yet she called her people to union, to stand for Hawaii. Onipa'a, right, was her cry, which is to stand firm, steadfast, and established in the identity of Christ, no matter what winds will blow. And she did that, communicated that through her song, her written songs. And one of the most famous ones is the Queen's Prayer.
That is a mandatory song. We celebrated our 25th anniversary and at our gala, and I told my board that, to me, that is the one thing that cannot change, is that we always begin what we do with the Queen's Prayer, because it is a great reminder for us, as you say, to be steadfast in our faith, because we love the islands, we love the people, we love our children.
Yeah, it's such a gift, right? So basically what they did then, we just copy. I mean, I look at you, Eva, and I see that you are incredibly steadfast. You are incredibly faithful. And that's why so many people love you, you know, and we're hoping, I think you and I are on the same page, that our kids and our grandkids go and look at the good that we can model and copy, and a little bit less of the junk that we model.
That's
Don't
right.
copy that.
That's right. And I know that, you know, in our conversation today and next week when we end our conversation, what I want to show people is, again, we have a history. And it's so funny. I'm so glad that you made that clarification between the two queens, because in my mind, I know they're two separate women, and then there's the generations in between. But I almost see it though as the strengthening of the Christian faith here in Hawaii among the, you know, among the ali'i, and all the way ending, but it didn't end. You know, even though the monarchy ended, the faith did not, and it was strong among the people. And so talk briefly about our state motto, because a lot of people know our state motto. And I love it because when you and I did the trainings that we did recently, you did the whole motto, and a lot of people only get part of the motto. So speak about that, because I think that is fascinating.
Oh, well, this is a point in history that is very interesting. And it comes from Kamehameha III, who was in power during the 1840s and 50s and 60s. And what happened was, as he was in rule over Hawaii, he ruled the Iolani Palace had not even been built yet. And so the place of office, so to speak, was a place called Pu'owaina. And that is where the king's voice became the place of proclamation and leadership. But what happened was, the British ships, not the United States now, the British ships, this is in 1843, the British ships came and audaciously brought their soldiers, their ships, and went to Pu'owaina, addressed the king, and basically stripped him of his power. And for nearly 6 months, 5.5 months, they were trying to take over Hawaii in terms of having British constitutional rule. So they lowered the Hawaiian flag. How audacious, right? Can you imagine? And so politically, they announced this, and around the world, our king, Kauikeaoli, King Kamehameha III, was silenced around the world politically. He was like, probably shouldn't say what I was just going to say. And so they called each other to prayer. He actually had a cabinet, and one of the people in his cabinet was a reverend pastor and a doctor, and his name was Jared Judd. And he chose to intercede in a prayerful way and actually a political way on behalf of the king. And after meeting in a cabinet meeting, they decided that they would gather not only the cabinet members, but the people of Hawaii for prayer. And that was one of the steps that they wanted, because he felt that Hawaii had maybe lost their unitedness in prayer. And so he called for that and made a great decree across Hawaii. But on top of that, Dr. Jared Judd began to write letters and sent them across to Queen Victoria. And he petitioned for the rule to be returned to King Kamehameha III. And in so doing, he risked his life in challenging British presence and British rule. He risked his life in inviting the Hawaii people, the Hawaiian populace, to live righteously. Like, he literally, it was a call to repent and to come back to righteousness and to pray. And so for 6 months, they were sort of in this place, like, are we going to lose our status, as a Hawaiian kingdom? And through the different communications, Jared Judd brokered almost solely by himself. And you can read all the letters at can't remember the building right now, but they have
At Bishop Museum?
No, it's not at Bishop Museum. It's the one next to
Oh, the
Cohen
archive. Is
Church.
it the archives?
Yeah,
right
the
there?
archives. Yeah. So you can read all of these. And he brokered the independence to be returned back to Hawaii. So then there was an admiral. His name was Admiral Thomas, who Thomas Square is named after. He was sailed back to Hawaii from Britain. And he garnered a signature from the Queen of Britain, from the Prime Minister of France, and also from the President of America at that time. And I don't have his name written down, but if I'll have to tell you who it is later. But anyway, so from those two countries, Britain, France, and America, they advocated for the return of power back to King Kamehameha III. And because they were blown away by not only the success, but the rapidness of return of power and the global recognition of return of power to Hawaii, the king went to Kaihao Church and prayed these words on the steps. And he said, "Ua mau ke ea o ka aina I ka pono, I kainoa o Yesu Christo, no ke kumu ia e pule ana o ka aina ya Yehovah." Meaning, the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness in the name of Christ Jesus. For this reason that the people have returned to prayer to Yahweh.
That is so, Maile, that is such a great way to end. So we only have about a minute left for this episode, but it's a great tie-in to how we're going to move into our next portion of the conversation. So those of you listening and watching, stay tuned for next week's show, because we're going to finish this great conversation with Maile, and we are going to talk about the righteousness in the land. And we're going to talk about how that righteousness, how we are called to bring that righteousness to our families, to our community, to our keiki, to our kupuna. And so make sure you like this video, that you share it, that you subscribe, hit that notification button so you'll know every single time we upload a new video. So you don't want to miss this. You want to stay tuned for this. And next week, I'm going to tap into Maile's mana'o, and I'm going to have her share with us her thoughts on the Hawaiian family and the culture, and why it's so important for us not to listen to all the negative noise that's out there today attacking our children. So Maile, you stay tuned so we can continue our conversation, and the rest of you, will see you all next week. Mahalo, everybody.